The 2005 Gleneagles Summit revived Live Aid and had millions protesting. The G8 made big promises, $21.5 billion of aid for Africa by 2010. But so far, only $7 billion has been handed over. And today it's been announced that Italy and France are far behind on their pledges. On the eve of a G8 summit of foreign ministers, we ask if Africa and poverty is anywhere on their agenda. Joining me to answer that question from London, editor of the Colombo Pan-African Journal, Expo, Nani Kofi joins us, and on the phone, also from London, African specialist Ayo Johnson. Ayo, let me start with you. Many thanks to both of you for being with us. All 8 of the G8 countries are facing economic crises, we know that, but on the whole, 6 of them have managed to either stay on track or set their own targets when it comes to this issue. Why is it that France and Italy are just so far behind that they in fact account for 80% of the shortfall of this target? Do they just not care?
Well, it could be that they don't care, but really it's really, really awful. I mean, these guys, both the French and the Italians, have actually gone to this Gleneagles conference and actually stated that they would help Africa. They haven't done so. There's a discrepancy between the actual pledges made and actual receipts on the ground. And it's really egg on their faces. And of course, shame on them. They've got to do far better. And the excuses that are being banded around saying that it's the credit crunch and so on and so forth is not good enough. Africa needs the money, they need the aid quickly, and there are large numbers of people whose lives are dependent on it. So it's really a crisis in itself.
You know, the issue of Africa, as you well know, Aya, these big waves of support and pressure on governments followed by big promises, it's nothing new. It's been going on for decades now. Has it been taken seriously, and is it being taken any more seriously now?
Well, they've got good intentions, but I'm afraid there's some element of slack culture that's been coming out to play here, and what we're seeing is a reflection of that. But I'm quite pleased that civil society are not prepared to stand for this, which is why when we do have these Gleneagles conferences and these G8 meetings, there's so much protest. People are clearly angry because it's not just about the issue about the money. It's also about issues about trade, inequality, issues of climate change, and issues that are affecting real lives. Large numbers of Africans are living below the poverty. Large numbers of Africans need access to education and healthcare. And this aid, which clearly is a pledge from the G8, is required urgently and needed now.
Let's bring in Nani Kofi at this point, also joining us from London. Many thanks for being with us here on Press TV. Ballooning state debts, revival of the banking sector, new rules for global finance. Those are set to be the hot topics at the G8 meeting next month, and not for Africa, for themselves. There's no emphasis on Africa, though, as there was a number of years ago. And this deadline now only about six months away. Is there any hope that it might be met? Is there any hope that they might even discuss it at the next G8 meeting?
In fact, actually, even when these issues are supposed to be discussed, they do not address the problem that faces Africa and other developing countries. In fact, when it comes to aid, I would want to quote a native indigenous American leader, Cuauhtemoc, who pointed out some time ago that if Latin America wanted to ask the West to pay back the gold, silver, which they got from South America, the 14th to the 16th century, with the kind of interest they have on international law, Europe will owe the South America a ton of gold and silver heavier than the weight of the whole of the planet itself. So it is important for us to look at the element which I will call even reparation. The fact that the resources have been looted which need to be returned, and which makes it more criminal that when these issues are not being addressed, it's not as if there is needed aid to help a certain part of the world. Actually, a certain part of the world have been looted. And like war crimes, people who have been involved in the looting, whether they are predecessors or they are people of today, need to pay back. That is what the issue is.
Can I play devil's advocate here? To those that say, taking into account the global economic crisis, the many that are suffering in the West now, right now, should Africa and poverty there be given a lower priority on the global platform as they deal with the global crisis?
I think that is not an issue which will even arise at all. I think that, as Lula of Brazil pointed out, the so-called developing countries are not responsible for this crisis. The so-called developing countries are not in the driving seat of the system of marginalization which has created this crisis. So, whilst there is this supposed crisis, there is still the responsibility of addressing the loot of the so-called developing countries, which is a criminal issue which has to be addressed as reparation.
Ayo, your thoughts on what has just been said, and of course the financial crisis affecting Africa as well. Ayo.
Well, in a nutshell, Africa's been growing of about 6% every year for the last 3 or 4 years, and to see the global crisis for which they're not responsible for affecting them to this effect, it's really, really sad. But also, I think Africa's got to look at itself now and probably take a leaf out of Gaddafi's book, which is, as he's head of the African Union, has recently called for United States of Africa, as maybe an opportunity for Africa to be able to work together as a unit and address some of these issues personally.
How crucial is it then, this issue, this deadline that's coming up in terms of the aid that's been promised?
Well, I think it's very crucial. The aid is needed urgently. Donor countries have to give this money. They've told us that they would do so. They're negating on that pledge, and it's rightfully so that media outlets like yourself can expose them and shame on them, and more so for them to be able to realize that they've got to meet up to these obligations, because lives are at risk, economies are at stake, and very much so Africa needs that money urgently.
And Nani Kofi, how can the international community ensure that these pledges are kept to? Because time and again we do see that indeed they're bypassed, these deadlines are bypassed without really even a single word on that.
There are two issues here. One is the capacity of these supposed less developed countries to intervene internationally as a united force in all this forum. The other thing which I want to stress here is, you see, when it comes to issues with countries like this, we are told there's economic crisis. Look, if an ordinary person is owing, is in debt, do we give the excuse of the economic conditions, the financial conditions which the ordinary person faces? The fact is, when you are responsible for economic mismanagement and economic crimes, you have to find a way of addressing it.
Nani Kofi, I should say, I'd like to stop you there. Thank you for your comments, joining us there from London, as well as Ayo Johnson on the phone from the capital as well. And Ayo neatly brought me on to my next topic when he mentioned Muammar Gaddafi. It's something you don't see every day, a country rolling out the red carpet for a country it once colonised. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi is receiving first-class treatment on his landmark trip to Italy. Today he spoke at the Italian Senate, where some colonial-era sores were reopened. He lashed out at US policies too. Italy, Libya's former colonial ruler, is now its biggest trade partner.